The first time I used worm castings, wow. Okay guys, I've got to tell you, this is one of those stories that completely took me by surprise, and I just had to share it with you all. So, picture this. I'm minding my own business, doing what I love, taking care of my plants. I've always been into gardening. There's something so satisfying about watching your plants grow, right? It's like a mini miracle happening in your own home. But for some reason, I kept hearing this one thing over and over again in the gardening world, and no, it's not some fancy new plant variety or a shiny new gardening tool. It's something that, at first, sounded a little, well, weird. Worm castings. Yeah, you heard that right. Worm poop. But not just any worm poop. It's like this black, crumbly, super nutrient-rich soil additive that's supposed to work wonders on plants. People were talking about it like it was a game changer. And I thought to myself, how could something as simple as worm poop make such a difference? Is it really that special? It almost sounded too good to be true, so, like any curious person, I decided to investigate. I started doing some research, and honestly, the more I read, the more I was like, okay, maybe I need to give this a try. But let's be real, I was also skeptical. I mean, who in their right mind willingly chooses to use poop from worms in their garden? So before I took the leap and actually decided to give worm castings a try, I really had no idea what they were about. The first time I ever heard about them was during one of those random conversations you have with a friend who's deep into gardening. You know, the ones where they start dropping all this knowledge and suddenly make you feel like you've been gardening all wrong this whole time? That's how it started for me. I was talking to a friend who has a garden that honestly looks like it could be a botanical garden. Everything is always so lush and vibrant, and I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, how do you do it? So of course I asked, and that's when they casually dropped the phrase, worm castings, into the conversation. At first, I honestly thought I'd misheard them. I mean, worm poop? That didn't sound very glamorous, to say the least. But my friend was acting like it was this magical ingredient, something that could completely transform your garden into this thriving paradise. The way they talked about it, like it was a secret gardening hack that everyone needed to know, got me curious but also a little skeptical. I mean, I didn't want to be over here putting worm poop all over my plants if it wasn't going to do anything. But as my friend continued to explain, I started to realize that worm castings weren't just some trendy gardening fad. They're actually packed with a ton of benefits that I wasn't even aware of. For starters, they're 100% natural and organic. No weird chemicals or synthetic stuff, just pure, nutrient-dense goodness. They're made by worms, yes, but it's not just plain old worm poop. Worm castings are the result of worms digesting organic matter and turning it into a nutrient-rich substance that's perfect for plant growth. What really sold me on the idea, though, was when my friend explained how worm castings help improve the soil itself. They're not just a fertilizer, they actually help with soil aeration, which is crucial for healthy root growth. Alright, so now that I had all this information about worm castings and was super curious, I was ready to jump in and try them for myself. But, like any responsible plant parent, I didn't want to go overboard all at once. I had heard all the hype, but I wanted to test this out slowly to see if it actually lived up to the promises I'd been hearing. So I decided to start small and see how my indoor plants would react first. I remember walking into my local garden store, the bag of worm castings in hand, feeling a little nervous but also excited. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. What if I totally messed this up? But when I got to the counter, the cashier looked at me and smiled like she knew exactly what I was up to.
You're gonna love it. It's amazing for your plants.
When I got home, I opened up the bag and I was honestly kind of surprised. It didn't smell bad at all. Nothing like you'd expect from worm poop, right? It actually had this earthy, rich smell that made it feel like I was holding a bag of premium soil. I was ready to see some magic happen. Now, I didn't want to just dump the worm castings on top of my plant soil like I had no clue what I was doing. So, I grabbed a few of my indoor plants, some succulents, a fern, and a couple of houseplants, and decided to try mixing the worm castings into their soil. I wasn't about to go all in, so I took a small amount of the castings and blended them gently into the top layer of soil, just enough to get them to mix in but not overwhelm the plants. It was super easy, no complicated steps involved. After mixing, I watered my plants like I normally would, just to get everything settled in. And honestly, that was it. I didn't need to do anything special. The best part? It didn't take much work at all. Plus, I didn't need to worry about using any harsh chemicals, which, let's be real, felt pretty good. But, as I was finishing up, I started wondering, is this really going to work? Am I going to see any difference? So, I did what anyone would do. I just waited. I kept up with my regular watering and care routine, but I started noticing something almost immediately. Within a few days I could tell that my plants were responding to the castings. It was subtle at first, like a little bit more luster on the leaves or some new growth poking through. But the more I looked, the more I realized my plants were doing better. They just looked happier. Alright, here we go. This is the part where everything comes full circle. After weeks of using worm castings on my plants, the results were not only noticeable, they were downright mind-blowing. I went into this experiment with a little bit of skepticism, but I ended up being completely blown away by how much of a difference it made. The plants that had been fed those magical worm castings were thriving like never before. Let's start with my succulents. These guys have always been a bit picky. Sometimes they'd grow well and other times they'd just sit there looking sad and underwhelming. But after using the worm castings, it was like they came to life. The leaves became more vibrant and full, their color deepened, and the texture got more plump and healthy. Then, there was my fern, which honestly I wasn't even sure would benefit from worm castings. Ferns can be a little tricky to keep alive, and mine was definitely no exception. But after a few weeks of using the castings, the difference was night and day. New fronds started growing and the plant looked fuller and greener. But it wasn't just about the growth, it was the overall health of my plants. The stems were sturdier, the leaves were shinier, and everything just seemed to have more life. The best part? I didn't have to do anything extra. I didn't need to change my care routine. I also started noticing something really cool. My plants were becoming a lot more resilient. Now, I'm not saying I had a pest infestation or anything, but there was definitely a noticeable difference in how the plants handled small annoyances like occasional pests or environmental stress. The plants just seemed stronger. They were more immune to those little problems that used to crop up every now and then. At this point, I was hooked. I started using worm castings on all of my other plants, from the bigger house plants to the ones on my balcony. And the results were just as amazing. Every plant, big or small, seemed to thrive. I was starting to feel like a plant whisperer, but I knew it wasn't me. It was the worm castings working their magic.